The purpose of this screencast is to take the notes you took on the New Deal a couple days ago and put them into different words so you can understand the big ideas or the umbrella ideas, what was really happening during relief, recovery, and reform. I'm also going to introduce the New Deal in terms of how it was different from what Hoover, the previous president, offered to get the country out of the Great Depression. And we're also going to add some notes about conclusions or things that come out of the New Deal. What are some of the concerns? What were some of the benefits? You can pause at any time during this screencast to gather notes if you feel you're falling behind. You can also pull out the need to knows, which you will need to do anyway to speed up the process. So use that pause button. Also, listen to the anecdotal things that I say, and you can add those to the notes. You don't always need to just write down what you see written on the screen. You can also add information that I've added with things that I've said. It might help you better understand the ideas. All right, here we go. Understanding the New Deal. So Roman numeral 1, New Deal. This is going to be an introduction. President Herbert Hoover, who was the president when the stock market crashed, he believed that after the crash happened, the economy will fix itself, that the government really doesn't have to get involved. So his plan was deemed too slow because it would take a while if we need to get these businesses going again. His idea was that the money would trickle down to those who immediately needed it. But his plan did not call for helping those in immediate need. And he was strongly opposed to the government getting involved, though he did loosen up a little bit as his presidency drew to an end, but he did not think the government should get involved. So he had a laissez-faire approach to trying to get out of the Great Depression, hoping that businesses would take care of it themselves. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's plan, and we're going to call him FDR, to pull the U.S. out of the Great Depression, we're going to call the Great Depression GD. So here are some tenets of his plan, or big ideas. He required government to lead the reforms during the Great Depression. So unlike Hoover, FDR believed that the government has to get involved. It cannot be laissez-faire. These businesses will not recover themselves. The banks will not recover themselves. Agriculture is going to need support, all from the government. So are individuals and their individual finances. D, FDR plan required the government to spend a lot of money. So that's going to be taxing. So taxing those with means in order to help those in need or help those programs get off the ground. And there are 3 parts of the deal you're very familiar with. Relief, providing relief to those who need it most. Shelter, food, etc. Lowercase b, recovery. So that is getting the country back on its feet, getting the banks back on their feet, getting people's personal finances in order, helping out agriculture, and helping out those businesses so that they can get going again, getting people employed. And C, reform, making sure that the Great Depression or something like it never happens again. So putting programs in place that will prevent it from happening again. On to Roman numeral 2. So we're at the first part of the New Deal, which is relief. So during the Great Depression, 25% unemployment. So that means 1 in 4 workers were out of work. And that's 13 million workers. So those are people of working age. Up to 1,000 people losing their homes per day. So homes were being foreclosed on. They weren't able to make the payments to keep their homes because they were out of work. So the New Deal makes programs to provide immediate help to those in need. So providing them with food, shelter, and jobs. Jobs like planting trees, building roads. So these are things that everybody uses. So FDR's idea is we're going to put money into those communal spaces or things that are used by the community. That's where people are going to be able to get employed because we all use them. It's helpful anyway for everyone. Money to help those in need, so providing government aid to those that were food insecure, without shelter. Also, FDR, as part of the relief, proposed a bank holiday. And all the banks were closed, and only healthy banks were allowed to reopen. So the government assessed and looked at the various banks around the country, said, well, this one's healthy, meaning that it's going to be run properly and it's got the right infrastructure in order to run properly, and we can count on it. That will be allowed to open. And those that were not had to remain closed. And this helped restore the public's confidence in the banking system. The government was now involved, and they were going to ensure that the banks that they were putting their money into would have a system in place that ensured that their money would be safe and not be spent frivolously and then lost like what had happened previously. Roman numeral 3, recovery, which is the second part of the New Deal plan. So this helped fix problems with the economy. One way was through production. So building roads, bridges, dams, libraries, schools, post offices, all public and communal spaces or things used by the community. Getting people employed, getting those things built, getting not only people employed, but construction businesses going, etc. So that money was now going into the hands of people. Now people were spending that money again, and that would hopefully get the economy going and get everybody involved in the money flowing again. Loans to small businesses to increase productivity. So to get those small businesses going again, loans were distributed in order to help them out so that they wouldn't go under. And 8 million jobs were created. And for agriculture, programs to improve farming practices. So they had scientists come in and actually speak to farmers and provide programs in order to educate farmers on how to best farm so that something like the Dust Bowl doesn't happen again. An example of this might be switching a crop. So in other words, you grow one crop on the land one year, and then the next year you would grow another crop. And then that doesn't tax the soil as much. It doesn't remove the nutrients. Also, not growing on leaving the soil during one season, just not growing anything on it so it has a chance to rejuvenate. Lower production levels to drive prices up. So they encouraged farmers to not grow as much or not yield as much. And then that would lower the supply, and with the same demand, by lowering the supply, that's going to drive the prices up. So the farmers will be making money once again. Roman numeral 4 is the third part of the plan, which is reform. And this is to make laws to make sure the Great Depression doesn't happen again. So in the banking sector, deposit insurance. This means putting insurance on money that's deposited. So anybody who puts money into the bank knows that their money is, there's a separate business that is covering that money. So if it is lost, the person will still have the money, will still be able to withdraw their money from the bank. This was not in place before the crash in 1929, hence resulting in why the bank runs destroyed a lot of the banks. Social Security was put in place. So this was money that was taken out of people's paychecks and put aside for retirement. This was helping individuals make smart choices. If people couldn't make those choices themselves, the government now was stepping in and helping them make sound choices so that when they retired and were no longer productive, or at least part of the workforce, they still had something saved away. And employment and housing rules. So employment and housing rules were put in place in order to ensure that housing was now secure and that people wouldn't lose their homes. And then also with employment, certain laws were put in place, regulations put in place so that people could maintain and hold on to their jobs. More regulation of banks and stock market. So laws and programs were made in order to ensure that the banks were investing their money wisely and giving out loans that were wise and fair, and also stock market regulations. So regulating what the stock market and its behavior so that it would notice the signs of when things were getting too good. So there were things that were put in place or signs put in place in order to help the stock market regulate itself. Roman numeral 5, benefits or concerns of the New Deal. So benefits. Provides aid to people in need. Gets people back to work. Fixes problems that led to the Great Depression. And creates modern infrastructure, roads, buildings, bridges, power lines, and all those programs that put people back to work went back into helping the community. Concerns. Did it work? Question mark. Without government support, economy dips in 1937. So in other words, the government started to pull out a little bit and take on a little bit more of a laissez-faire approach. And there is a dip in 1937 when that occurs. So there's kind of evidence that without the government support, the economy doesn't run as well. It's not as healthy. Great Depression doesn't end until World War II starts. And World War II provided opportunities for production and actually spurred the economy and helped out in certain sectors because they had to prepare the country for war. So really the Great Depression continues on all the way to World War II. So there's a question to ask, did the New Deal really work? Well, you have evidence here that without government support, economy dips in 1937, so the government kind of has to be there. Did it really make reforms? Or did it just make it so it always has to be in place? And then Great Depression really took World War II to end it. It wasn't necessarily the New Deal that ended it. Productivity returns as country prepares for war. So was it the war that got the country and productivity going, or was it the New Deal? It seems like it was more the war, World War II. Costly. Government took on a lot of debt to fund the New Deal. So yeah, they were taxing those with means or those with money that they could tax, but also the government was borrowing money in order to pay for all these programs. And government grows. Many more government programs and employees. And I think this number is off here. It should be 580,000 people employed to 1.3 million people employed by the government. So whereas before, during the Progressive Era, where you had, of course, laissez-faire go to some government regulation over the course of the Progressive Era, the size of the government explodes during the New Deal. And there's a lot more government jobs because the government was taking over every sector, or at least involved in every sector of the economy, from big business to agriculture to personal finance to banking. And that took hiring people and creating positions and jobs to regulate. So the government gets very large. Conclusions. New Deal permanently changed the role of government in the United States. So New Deal was designed to help people and that was the role of government to help people during the New Deal. And taking on debt becomes a new trend. So in other words, the government doesn't necessarily always have its books balanced, but it's always in debt in order to pay for programs because now the government is so large and the government is so involved. So reforms of the Great Depression were led by government. So the government was involved in making the reforms that were needed to end the Great Depression. The government had to be involved. Problems were too widespread for activists or muckrakers to address. You needed government involvement. Reforms of New Deal have so far helped the United States avoid another Great Depression. We have not encountered something as bad as what was encountered in 1929, or at least what was felt as bad. In the 2007-2008, there were problems with the economy, and there was actually more programs made in order to get the country out of that recession or depression, but it was not as bad as the Great Depression, where people were in dire need of the basics, like food and shelter. And reforms cost a lot of money. So these reforms were expensive, and as it says, putting the country into debt, and they cost money to keep the government involved in all those different sectors like banking, agriculture, personal finance, etc. So the government really takes on a whole new role after the New Deal. This whole notion of laissez-faire is over. The government now is hyper involved in business and regulating business. All right, at this point you want to, if you haven't yet, pull out the need to knows, and you will be writing summaries after the need to knows are completed, and you'll do those summaries in class.